fantastic to have the first slot here because I imagine there's going to be a lot of ransomware tonight, so I get to take all the interesting facts first before the other speakers get a chance. I'm from Darktrace. We are a UK-based tech company based out of Cambridge, which is where I'm from, and we have a global presence, and we basically use AI, self-learning AI, to take on the challenge of cybersecurity. And given the context of cybercrime, I think ransomware is a particularly good place to start. So let me talk a little bit about what I'm going to go through today. So I'll just give a little bit of a background to ransomware. As said, we probably know most of it, but just to set the stage, then I'll talk through a little bit about how we use self-learning AI to take on that challenge, and off that the use of autonomous response to respond to a machine speed threat with machine speed response. And kind of frame that in the stages of ransomware, and I'll give a couple of real-world examples from our customer base just to kind of back up what I'm saying. So yeah, we're seeing this renewed use, this constant renewal and evolution of ransomware. So just to take an example, when I started at Darktrace 4 years ago, GandCrab was by far and away the biggest ransomware group out there, and they kind of officially retired themselves. And then, lo and behold, a few months later, essentially the same group re-emerged under the REvil banner, which is still going now. And this kind of evolution and semi-retirement and popping back up is constantly happening in these criminal gang groups. And in the last 12 months, we've seen the double extortion. So we've seen that in almost every ransomware case in the last 12 months, and it's hard to believe that actually 18 months ago, that was a brand new idea that only a few ransomware gangs were doing. So this idea of stealing the data before then encrypting it so that you've got the opportunity to extort twice. So yeah, huge industries. Ransomware as a service, another term I'm sure you'll hear a lot of tonight. This idea that actually criminal gangs aren't running the whole show themselves now. They're leasing out parts of their malware. You know, you have specialists in gaining entry who will then sell on the dark web that entry to a network, and then another criminal gang picks it up. All this kind of makes it incredibly complicated. We're seeing great responses from law enforcement and government agencies in the last 6 to 8 months, but you know, it's very challenged like whack-a-mole. And then also this increased attack surface that we're seeing with work from home. Extra vulnerabilities that, you know, in the last 12 months you can reel off 5 or 6 incredibly important, Log4j obviously being the most recent. So yeah, I guess some big facts about ransomware. I'm sure you don't need to be told this, but it has an incredibly damaging effect. And actually that 21 days down is probably more important than the actual ransom paid, because that's what basically gets people to pay the ransom, is that they're losing a hell of a lot more money by being offline than they are having to pay the ransom. So they're kind of, well, we may as well pay the ransom to at least get ourselves back online, mitigate those costs. Interestingly as well, we're seeing, since the Colonial Pipeline incident, we've seen this change where the average ransom payment is lower than what it was before. So criminal gangs are going for kind of medium-sized fish rather than big fish, because they've realized that the big fish is what's drawing the attention of law enforcement and governments. And so they're going for a wider, smaller group rather than the kind of big fish in the pond. So Darktrace, self-learning AI. So we essentially don't use signatures, rules, threat intelligence. What we do instead is we take a network from an organization and we understand what is normal within that. We take the data feeds from across the digital estate and build up a pattern of life for each device and each user, how it communicates. So we have an understanding of self. There's no reliance, as I said, on historical attack data, and there's no need for constant tuning or updating. So, you know, we don't need a 4-week period to create a baseline that then perhaps 6 months down the line, when everyone starts working from home for some unknown reason, then we don't need to update that baseline. It evolves with the organization. What it means is it can then pick out anomalous events, unusual activity within that, and add a cybersecurity context to that. Because we're not giving it an indication of what is bad, it can spot novel and unusual attacks before the community know what they are. And we've seen this with things like Log4j. Within hours of the Log4j announcement, attackers were abusing that to deploy cryptojacking malware on deployments. There was no IOCs for that, but because of the unusual patterns of life that were being used by the attacker, we were able to spot that without having to know what the infrastructure being used by attackers was. So once we've got this ability to detect the unusual activity, we can then apply an autonomous response. So this is a targeted action that allows an organization to continue business as normal, but is able to take surgical precision against a particular threat. So it knows what was normal for that device or user or groups and is able to just take the action to stop what is malicious or unusual. It basically allows security teams, it buys them time to then get to their own response hours or potentially days later. We know that attackers they're using a technique of like the out-of-hours idea, so they'll wait to a Friday night or they'll wait to a Christmas holiday. And the example I got later is actually one from Christmas Day 2020. So they know they're looking for weak points in that security team. So the idea that you can buy time with autonomous response is incredibly powerful. Now, while that autonomous response is happening, we have the cyber AI analyst, which is automatically analyzing the alerts created by Darktrace. It's automatically investigating in the same way that a human analyst would to create a security narrative. So instead of just getting a series of alerts and then a human analyst having to come in and pick together those alerts, work out how they correlate, work out a timeline, and pull out the IOCs from that, instead that's doing it automatically and can find every device on the network being impacted. What this means is that when the security team does come to respond, they have a fully completed narrative that allows them that quick and precise response. And I've got a couple of examples of that later. We've got this stat here of reducing triage time for up to 92%. So I've obviously introduced it in the framework of incident response. This is also useful just day to day, because if you imagine, let's say you get 10 alerts in a day, that takes a human analyst has to investigate each one of those. Now, if 9 of those are done automatically by cyber AI, that allows that human analyst to focus on that one last one that a human analyst can bring, that ability to join the dots and correlate and investigate deeper, and spend a lot more time on that and kind of do what they're good at. So earlier I mentioned across the digital estate, Darktrace essentially takes data from wherever it's possible to get data within an organization. Now, in the context of ransomware, that's presumably going to be predominantly network and maybe email if that's going to be the initial intrusion. OT is in operational technology, so the industrial systems that are used in critical infrastructure, we see that can be targeted either indirectly or directly. So that can be relevant. Endpoint as well, if a laptop at home is actually the initial intrusion, you want to have visibility over that. But also cloud and SaaS in a more broader cybersecurity sense, is giving that visibility of every user and bringing together that data in one place in a single screen, in a single platform. So here I have mapped ransomware onto a kill chain. I know the kill chain is a little bit outdated. I much prefer the MITRE framework, but for the purposes of this 15-minute talk, ransomware does map quite nicely onto the kill chain in terms of intrusion, foothold, lateral movement, etc., data exfiltration, ransom. So I'm going to talk a little bit about how Darktrace detects each of those steps. So the first one is the initial intrusion. Here we've got some common intrusion methods for us at Darktrace. I think those first two are by far away the biggest, and actually I think RDP brute force is a little bit narrow. What I mean by that is any kind of internet-facing vulnerability, be it an exploit, be it compromised credentials of a VPN, be it a good old-fashioned brute force. Now, what we know is that there's tools out there, security tools that are very good at preventing all of these. But we also know that attackers are very good at eventually finding their way through. So how do you spot that once they're in, as soon as they've managed to find a way past? So often they'll be using, as I've said, techniques that have not been seen before. And so as soon as you have a successful phishing email, as soon as you have someone who clicks on a link and it installs some kind of malicious activity, that device is going to start behaving in a way that's unusual. And that's what we're picking up as soon as it happens. Now, if it does successfully get in, the attacker's going to try a number of things. Lateral movement, command and control. We know that they're very good at remaining undetected in lateral movement by using living off the land technique, so using tools that are already pre-installed. So, for example, we see a lot of PsExec abuse. PsExec is an administrative tool that's automatically installed on Windows file share systems, SMB. We know they like to use remote management tools. Got to be careful, given one of the main sponsors of the football team that plays here, but there's multiple remote management tools that may already be installed on the network, and they use that to initiate their backdoor access. Command and control as well. We've seen this evolution of attack frameworks like Cobalt Strike, which are incredibly good at staying ahead of threat intelligence. We've had incidents where, the command and control infrastructure is completely brand new. Virus total, it looks completely green. There's nothing to show. Within hours or days, that's then being picked up and spotted, but that's too late because the attacker has already initiated that attack. And then also the unusual movement of data, both internally for data staging and then the actual exfiltration, often to legitimate file sharing endpoints as well. So it's not like it's very difficult to pick that out as a malicious endpoint. And then finally, if it gets this far, you've got the actual encryption, which is incredibly difficult to prepare for in terms of policies within a network without some kind of disruptive programming that kind of blocks users getting to legitimate file shares, things like that. But by enforcing that pattern of life, we can limit the amount of encryption that can happen until suitable remediation. So let's just have a look at what this is. God, that's a lot, isn't it? This is an example of a cyber AI analyst overview of a ransomware incident. Okay, so where you can see that the attack has been automatically detected into 6 stages across the top there. We're currently focusing on step 3, which is the encryption of files over SMB. So we've got, on the left-hand side, we've got a high-level overview in text. I don't know how clear that is. It's a little bit foggy even from this distance. But then on the right-hand side, we've got the actual technical details that can then be taken away. So we've got things like the device and list of devices that have been affected, timestamps. We've got the destination shares, file shares that have been involved, data volumes, and then an example list of the files that have been encrypted, including the actual file extension that was added. So straight away, you can take this away and contain the threat as required. So let's go to 2 threat finds. I'm going to talk through 2 threat finds. So the first one is one where they had Darktrace in detection mode, but they did not have autonomous response. So I can talk you through a little bit about how the detection went. And then the second one is an incident where we did have autonomous response in place. So this is the one I was saying about that detonated on the 25th of December. 2 servers were making unusual connections to rare endpoints that turned out to be linked to ransomware, not known at the time. Data had been previously exfiltrated on Christmas Eve, and there was unusual activity within, including anomalous SMB, HTTP beaconing, abuse of RDP, and with data transfer. So here's a timeline to make that a bit clearer. Now, there's a few things I want to highlight about this. The first thing is that actually the initial compromise was on the 16th of December, and Darktrace pulled these out as unusual events, but clearly because they were unusual events, they weren't necessarily being flagged as ransomware. But it was clear that an attack was inside. Now, unfortunately, for whatever reason, this organization wasn't in the position to respond to this. So you can see that then remained dormant for 9 days. This is something that's quite common, and we're actually seeing this period of being dormant getting shorter and shorter. Then we see it's initiated back to life with a kind of backdoor RDP connection. Data exfiltrated to DropMe files, so not one of the big ones like Dropbox, but a legitimate file sharing service. And then finally on the 25th of December, the file extension added. Now, unfortunately, the organization let it reach this far. In fairness to them, they were then excellent in terms of their remediation and instant response, getting law enforcement involved, performing a full review of what had happened, what had gone wrong, and using Darktrace's visibility to perform a kind of forensic, not deep forensic, but forensic analysis of the timeline and what had gone wrong. And contrast that to, this is a cargo shipping organization. When I say zero-day ransomware, what I mean by that is the IOCs weren't publicly available. There was nothing on things like virus total and other threat intelligence to indicate what it was. An unusual large number of connections, writing SMB files. So we've got a single device that's been compromised, and it's trying to compromise other devices on the network. And Antigena responded by blocking connections from that device and quarantining it for 24 hours. So what does that look like? So here we've got kind of the pattern of life, internal connections made by that device over days before and after the event. We've got the model alerts are the orange and red dots at the top there. So you can see a couple of early indicators were alerted, but then that huge spike in connections was the initiation of the encryption, and that was detected and stopped by Antigena. And you see the response here at the bottom, that quarantine devices for 24 hours. So those are my two examples there. We've got loads more examples on our blog, not just ransomware, but there's a lot of them are obviously ransomware. So please do jump on there and take a look, written by both myself and my colleagues. Also, some great validation from some of our customers who use Darktrace in terms of how they fit that into their security stack and get the best value out of it. So yeah, thank you for listening. And please do jump on our website or come up to our booth upstairs.